Good afternoon. Thank you very much to the organizer and to Micah for having us here today. I'm going to basically follow on to what Amy was talking about, but from the point of view of one of the publishers who took place in that, who took part of that pilot of the taxonomy last year. And as well, I'd like to tell you a little bit about how we've been thinking at Nature Publishing Group about these issues. For the sake of completeness and disclosure, I should also mention that I currently serve on the board of ORCID, and I'm going to say a little bit about that later. Since this is about attribution, I thought it would be proper to start with acknowledgement of my colleagues who participated in this study at Nature Publishing Group, as well as Phil Campbell, who really initiated this focus on author contributions at Nature, and the group, Amy, Liz Allen, Marjorie, and Micah, who worked on this pilot taxonomy, as well as my colleagues at ORCID, who've provided some data for me today. So I have also my version of the authorship is growing slide, and this is just a slightly different presentation. I've sort of segmented the number of authors per paper over the years in the past 5 years, and you see that the light blue bars represent papers with less or equal to 5 authors per paper, and the dark blue side is from between 10 and 25 authors, and you really, and then the gray bars are over 25. But if you focus on these, the first and the third bar, you can see that even over the past 5 years, the number of articles published in Nature, and this is just original research in all disciplines, sort of the number of papers with less than 5 authors is going down, and the number of papers with between 10 and 25 authors is really going up. So this is something that is very tangible on a year-on-year basis. So what I'd like to do today is just talk a little bit about how we've been handling author contributions at the Nature Journal so far, and then tell you a little bit about our experience in this pilot taxonomy, and then finally made a few comments about the ecosystem that we're seeing emerging. So this is the sort of short history of our author contribution statements policies. We've started in 2009 to mandate the provision of an author contribution statement with every paper in the Nature journals. But that policy was really sort of 10 years in the making, and it started in 1999. It was at the suggestion of some authors who wanted to actually clearly explain what each of them had been doing in the paper. And it was really sort of following the lead of the biomedical journals, who had been starting to really place more emphasis on contributions and on definition of authorship, really. And I think that in the clinical literature, this was really driven by issues of ethics and ghostwriting and these kinds of things. But I think that we saw also that there is a very positive side to that, which is about credit, which is very important. So this was something that we started by allowing it and then and encouraging it, and by 2007 we'd seen that pretty much all the papers were coming in with that kind of statement, at least in certain disciplines, and we made it a mandatory policy in 2009. We also, in 2009, clarified a little bit the responsibilities of corresponding authors. Amy mentioned the issues with multiple corresponding authors, etc. I think that we really see corresponding authors as some role that has additional responsibilities that are very much linked to the publishing process, not necessarily to the authorship or the contribution to the paper. And we see these responsibilities before the paper is published, before submission, to really sort of serve as a collection and as a central person who really collects all the information necessary for the paper and make sure that everybody agrees with that paper. We still see papers submitted with people saying, "Oh, I didn't know I was an author on this paper," and I think that's a major problem. It's rare, but it happens. Obviously, during consideration, there is really this correspondence between the journal and one single person, which is important. But that responsibility also, from our perspective, extends after publication. When the paper is questioned, when they are issued, when data needs to be made available, the corresponding author in our book has responsibilities for that. So going back to the author contribution statements, there aren't many rules about them, actually. They're very free form. And the only, so we don't, and I think that's an important nuance, we don't prescribe what it takes to be an author. Obviously, we discourage honorary authorship, but we don't have a certain number of points that you need to tick in order to become an author on this paper. We take the view that this is for the authors to define. And in particular, I think we do that also, it's very pragmatic because we publish across many disciplines. And it's very difficult to have a one-size-fits-all because of the discipline-specific convention we've been mentioning. So we only have one major requirement, is that every author needs to be mentioned in the author contribution statement. And we don't really care what the contribution is, but it needs to be clear and transparent what this contribution is. Two other points that are worth mentioning is that these author contribution statements are in the original manuscript, so all the authors have seen and approved them, and we publish them in the final paper, so the readers can also make that distinction. So here is typically how it looks like. This is an article with 20 authors, and you see these kinds of specifics: design the study, analyze the data. It goes into much more details about which types of experiments certain authors performed, what their contributions were in terms of these experiments, or providing material, etc., doing some analyses, etc. So this is a fairly typical author contribution statement in a biomedical basic research paper. This is an article with 373 authors. Obviously, with these free-form texts, they need to become a bit more creative. And in this case, this consortium has really organized all the authors into these different groups that you see on the right side of the screen: production group, analysis group, and then they go on and list people based on their affiliation with these major types of contributions. So again, this is biomedical research. Papers with many authors are also obviously the realm of the physical sciences. We see a lot of those with these kinds of 400 types of authors. This is an example from the same amount of authors, same year, and this is the author contribution statement in that case. So, discipline-specific conventions do apply, right? And that's the... And the thing is that I actually don't have a major problem with that specifically, because in the physical sciences, particularly in high-energy physics, they have organized themselves. It means certain things. There is a convention in the community about what it means to be part of a collaboration, and being an author on the paper is part of that. So from our perspective as publishers, if we have a corresponding author who takes accountability for that, and the discipline is comfortable with that, potentially this is acceptable. But obviously it has all the issues that Amy has mentioned about other stakeholders wanting to use this kind of information. The other thing that I want to mention about something like this is that obviously it's not very readable, right? We have this horrible thing about initials, which is a legacy of print. It's because we are printing these and we don't reprint all the authors' names many times. But that's the problem. That's a flat piece of text that sits in a PDF or on an HTML page. It's not necessarily searchable. It's not portable. It's just part of the paper. So, and I think that's where we're starting it being limiting. Again, people need to be a bit creative here, and that's why we were starting to think about other ways. How can we expand these author contribution statements? So the pros and cons in summary, really, I think they can provide a lot of granularity for credit, and that's a very good thing, and it's something we would like to keep. And frankly, it's helpful from an editorial perspective, because we don't, it helps to deal with these questions of, I really want 6 first co-contributing authors, and then I would like 7 second equally contributing authors, and these kinds of very unhealthy, I would call it, obsession with the sequence and the position in the author list. It's very useful from an accountability point of view when a paper has been published and is questioned. This is absolutely something we go back to. The fact that it is as part of the initial submission is important in my mind, because I think it promotes, and I've been told that it promotes early discussions about authorship. People know they will have to write an author contribution statements for when they think they're submitting in one of the Nature journals, and they discuss authorship, and I think that's a very important point. And then finally, also, it showcases specific expertise, and I've been told that people look at that to find potential collaborators, for example. So I think there's a lot of very positive things. The downsides, as I mentioned, they don't present very well when there are more than a few authors. We still receive the difficult requests for co-first, co-seconds, etc. And as you've seen in physics, not all communities are adopting it. This is a text analysis that Micah has actually performed on 5 years' worth of the Nature contribution statement. And you see that, obviously some of the contributions come up very, very strongly. And for those of you at the back, I've picked out a few, and you can see that there are several themes there. They're really the type of contribution, so supervised, discussed, developed, assisted, and you see that there are nuances in how this is expressed. There are also very specific contributions, so the type of experiments, the type of reagents or animal models that were provided, a time at which, so in orange there, initial design interpretation, so it sort of positions you in the sequence of event that led to the paper, and then you see some contributions that Amy was talking about, biostatisticians, calculations, models, statistical, really start coming to life in these kinds of treatment. So this is the type of analysis that fed into the taxonomy. From our perspective, if you're thinking about a contribution taxonomy, this is my wish list, really. So I want it to be important for credit and for transparency. I want it to be good for accountability, so we need to actually be able to have sufficient granularity in that to provide both credit and accountability. It needs to respect community conventions, but also promote the best practices. So the things where we see that there are some unhealthy obsessions with things that we feel are fairly meaningless, this is something that should be that should encourage best practice. And also it needs to be easy to use, because something that we have to remember, even when we have 373 authors, there is one person submitting the paper. So, it has to be something that they can use ahead of time. And also being portable and something that we can surface then for other stakeholders, such as promotion committees, such as funding agencies, to really sort of follow this information. So this is the paper describing the taxonomy that Amy mentioned. I'll just come back to one of these graphs, which is about the comparison. So since we already had we were already asking for author contribution statements in a narrative format, we specifically asked people to compare that narrative format with the taxonomy. And I do take notice that 16%